In the news this week, dedicated public housing for the next generation, growing support for specific new housing targets for WA's young adults in need. A WAMN News exclusive.
Also tonight, we'll get it right. Deputy Prime Minister's pledge when questioned over AUKUS uranium disposal arrangements. Chops and Chats delivers mental health assistance with style, and later, Dr. Andrew Miller's comment.
This is The Evening News with Ivan Loom and Maliva Thorne.
Good evening. As Western Australia's housing crisis continues, there are calls for the government to reduce overall wait by constructing a dedicated number of public housing and create streamlined waiting process specifically for young adults. As home ownership becomes a luxury item for many Western Australians, will this policy work? Steve Anderson with this exclusive report.
With growing waitlists for public housing having no end in sight and home ownership becoming a luxury item, it is clear that the next generation of Western Australians are in peril.
Look, I think there's definitely a need for something specific for young people, and probably even below the 18 age range. I mean, we have homeless young people that are, 16 in community housing and so forth.
There are growing calls for the McGowan government to create a new line of public housing targeted at young adults in WA from ages 18 to 30, with dedicated housing stock allocations, dedicated queues, and youth-orientated housing policies. It is increasingly clear that creating a new stream of dedicated public housing stock and youth-only waitlists may serve as a solution to reduce the housing waitlist times for all. Youth Future's CEO, Mark Waite, supports this idea.
Absolutely. I think there needs to be an allocation for all the various groups. It's hard to say we need to give this house as a priority to a young person over maybe a single young mum or something like that. So I can understand the dilemmas associated with that. Our view is, again, if you spend the time and invest with young people, hopefully you'll reduce the need when they're older. And also, as I said before, there's specific needs that young people have. They don't need a large family home that's got a big backyard and all of those sorts of things that they can't care for. They need something that is simple, easy to maintain, that's close to services, close to shops, something that's cheap, public transport and so forth.
It is apparent that this crisis must be addressed. Community advocate Suresh Rajan also agrees that a new stream of dedicated youth housing stock and waiting lists would be a step in the right direction.
I think that if it is going to be showing that type of situation where you have these dedicated queues and dedicated cohort of housing just for the young people, if at the end of the day that is going to relieve the impact on the rest of the housing market, yes, I think it's absolutely an essential. But you start to look in terms of saying, okay, well, if you've got one for the youth, then should you also have one for Aboriginal young people, Aboriginal people in general, or should you have one for culturally and linguistically diverse communities? And you start to get into really narrowing the numbers down.
But there are other factors that need to be considered.
What they should be doing is just going to the existing rental properties that are around the place, offering to go into an arrangement. What you could do is the government subsidise part of that, and the rental owner still gets the whole amount that they were expecting, which is $500 a week. But the state government then is not having to build homes, it's just using the stock that's already here.
Because ultimately what we don't want is we don't want young people to be stuck in community housing for the rest of their lives. But what we want to see is we want to see those young people be supported to be able to hopefully break that cycle.
Steve Anderson, WAMN News.
While the number of public housing remains inadequate in Western Australia, will new policies of dedicated public housing stock and waiting periods for young adults aged from 18 to 30 years old make a difference? Liberal leader Libby Medham joins us briefly with her take. Libby, thanks for your time. What are the chances of young adults in need receiving public housing under the current climate?
This is even more challenging for our youth. For young people to attain social housing, it is even more difficult. There is less social housing now under the McGowan government than there was in 2017. It highlights how the McGowan government have failed our most vulnerable in our community. It will be particularly difficult for our youth.
Do you agree that there should be a dedicated number of public housing and queues streamlined for young adults to reduce the overall waiting list?
I think when it comes to social housing, it should be based on need, but it's extraordinary. There is 9,000 people on the priority social housing wait list. That highlights that there are many across this state who not only need a house, but desperately need a house. And I imagine there is some youth captured in that, but this government have failed to deliver. Not only have they failed to deliver their signature housing policy, but the number of social houses has actually gone backwards since 2017.
Libby Madam, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Hi there. Are you looking for a new home or want to refinance your car mortgage to get a better rate? At AA Finance Solutions, we have the expertise and knowledge to help you to find the right loan for your needs and budgets. Contact us today. Let us help you to make your home ownership dream a reality.
AA Finance Solutions, your local mortgage broker.
Australian Deputy Prime Minister discussed AUKUS and concerns surrounding the disposal of nuclear waste. WAME News questioned Richard Miles about the disposal of nuclear materials that will be needed for nuclear submarines during his visit to Western Australia. The minister said the waste will be dealt with on defence land and in an appropriate place that is remote from population in this country.
Well, part of being a responsible nuclear steward is having the responsibility of the nuclear material throughout its life cycle, and that includes its disposal. And so that's a responsibility which as a nation we accept. It's a completely reasonable question that you ask, and this is a significant step that we will be taking. It's going to require us to build a purpose-built facility in order to dispose of the spent nuclear reactors at the appropriate time. I'd want to make clear that the first of those will need to be disposed in the mid-2050s. So we have time to deal with this. We've made clear that we will be dealing with this on defence land in an appropriate place, and that obviously means a place which is remote from populations in this country. We've got time to get this right. We will get it right. What we've made clear is that within the next year we will announce the process by which that site will be identified and the kind of facility that we will need to put in place.
The WA state government has vowed to take action to improve the practical driving assessment booking system and to combat the issue of bulk drivers test bookings by bots. Drivers will no longer be able to swap PDA bookings as they have been able to do so in the past. This is an attempt to make access as equal as possible for customers. Extra security measures will also be taken to ensure that driving instructors do not utilise bots to make bulk test bookings. It has also been announced that the government will be recruiting more Department of Transport driving assessors to deal with rising booking numbers.
We want to make sure that we have a fair system and that everyone has the same access to booking a driving test. So there'll be some driving instructors who will not like this change. It's unfortunate, but it appears that some of these wholesale bookings, and we've seen some instances up to 100 bookings being swiped out straight away, that we want to try and prevent that happening.
Police are currently investigating an armed robbery in which a man was allegedly hit with an axe multiple times by a teenage boy. The alleged robbery occurred on the 13th of March at around 4:40 p.m. The man in his 30s confronted a person who was trying to steal his motorbike on Great Eastern Highway. Police stated while this confrontation was occurring, another juvenile male appeared, whom allegedly had an axe. Police will allege the offender chased the victim into a nearby business, striking him several times with the axe and a hammer. It will be further alleged that a third man arrived during the attack and threw multiple rocks at the victim. A 13-year-old boy and a 26-year-old man were apprehended by police. Another person is wanted over the incident. Anyone with information should contact Crime Stoppers.
The Ethnic Communities Council of WA has praised the government for funding multicultural women's interest matters after several organisations, including the Multicultural Services Centre of WA, received record funding during International Women's Day week. CEO Yazo Ponafurai responded positively to the news, as funding will allow organisations to create programs to make workplaces safer for all women from different backgrounds and cultures.
Will help for those organizations to help the women in need to achieve those skills and experience. So, without money, we can't do much. It's only so much voluntary work can be done. And I think, especially MSc, I think is a well-deserved money. And I'm, as a EC's Ethnic Communities Council President, I am happy to see, and I will also advocate for other organizations who are focusing on women and other matters to get other grants, not just this particular OMI grant.
Sculptures by the Sea exhibition is coming to a close on Monday as Western Australians flock to Cottesloe Beach for their last chance to enjoy the artwork. Among the crowds, Cottesloe MP David Honey took the opportunity to pick his favourite piece of artwork. The 2-story tall tube-shaped statue made out of plastic bottle tops has been chosen as Dr. Honey's favourite for 2023. He tells us why.
The piece of art is by Dion Nielsen. It's called Do You Realise? And may not be obvious from a distance, but it's completely constructed out of plastic bottle caps. You know, this is what you'd think is a pretty pristine beach. Plastic waste is a huge issue around the world, but it's a huge issue on our beaches in Western Australia, and it's really just people being careless and disposing of plastic waste improperly.
And that was a fascinating insight into this year's Sculptures by the Sea. So, Ivan, what do you think about Dr. Honey's choice of sculpture?
I think we both enjoy the same sculpture, and in fact, remember I told you last time how cool it was when the wind blows and the whole thing moves. It's made out of all the water bottle caps. It's a bit of a shame that it has to wrap up in the next day or two, but for those of you who still haven't gone there, want to take a look, tomorrow still have a window of opportunity, so don't miss it.
We'll recap this week's top stories again in just a moment.
But right now, here's Steve Anderson with Western Perspective after 10 months worth of holiday to take over Maddie's post. Steve, good to see you again.
Well, it was a great holiday and I'm happy to be back. Welcome to Western Perspective, I'm Steve Anderson. This week we continue with the Men's Mental Health Interview Series, where grassroots organisation Men's Talk kickstarts important discussions of healthy masculinity, mental well-being and new ways to reduce domestic violence. This week we spoke with Joseph Forkin, an Irish barber whose group Chops and Chats, who not only helped men in WA to get a good haircut, but also created a listening post to encourage people to come forward and speak about their difficulties.
Chop and Chats is it's a service that I came up with recently because I've been barbering for the last few years, and I've obviously built a relationship with clients, and I wanted to kind of get rid of that stigma where a lot of men, especially in my home country, there's a stigma where men can't talk and whatnot, and they can't come forward and speak what's on their mind or if they're going through something. And I wanted to kind of open up a door for men where they can come sit down, let's say have a beer, or even just to enjoy the experience of getting a haircut, but also having an option to open up to a barber and literally just talk whatever's on their mind. It doesn't have to be anything crazy that might be going on in their life, but just for them to know that, that I'm here to listen to them and whatnot, that they're comfortable, that they can come to me and more or less just speak about whatever, and that I'm there for them, and that men can come to someone like me or other barbers and just speak whatever's on their mind, knowing that we're there to listen, Yeah. So that's the purpose behind Chop and Chats.
Beautiful. So I've seen this kind of conversation stigmatised around women and hairdressers.
Yeah.
Why is it so important for men to have this conversation?
I think it's important for men because a lot of men, especially from where I'm from, they don't speak how they feel. They hold back and they'll just work through it, and then it'll come to a point where they're not dealing with what may be going on in their life, and then it all just comes down at one time, and then they might do something stupid, or and I think it's because it's the stigma, really. Do you know what I mean? It's like they don't know how to go to someone and talk to someone. They think it might be weird to go and talk to someone, you know, and just for them to understand that we're in a different generation now and that it's okay to talk, you know, because men don't really talk to other guys or other men about what might be going on in their life, you know, and that's why Chop and Chats is there for people. And especially in the last few years, I have guys coming into me that are from all ages, from young to older, in their 60s, and they come talk. They'll talk to me about what might be going on in their life, whether they're going through a divorce, where they might have been able to say that to some of their friends. Do you get me? So that's the purpose behind it all, and it's working. You know, and it's working especially out in Australia, and especially in my home country as well. I've seen a lot of older men being able to come forward and talk to me, and it's helping. You know?
It's a very non-confrontational way of being able to speak to someone.
Exactly. It's not like, you know, let's say you sit down and then you're talking to another person across the table and be like, what's wrong with you? Or what's the problem? Where when you're getting a haircut, you're building a relationship over time, and I'm listening to what they have to say, and I think it's more valuable. You're getting more out of it, especially for men, and you're building an experience for them, and you're giving them the best possible experience. And even if they don't like get something out of it at that, you know, when they came to get a haircut, they're still getting a good haircut. They're getting that haircut's giving them confidence. They're going to leave feeling good no matter what, you know. And if you can get a good conversation in, or even just listening to what they're saying, they're going to gain something from that over time.
Have you had any conversations that you're willing to share with clients that you've had that have really sort of changed their perspective on things that they've talked to you about?
Yeah, like so back in Ireland, before I came out to Australia, I had this one guy that came to me, and this is where the whole idea actually started of like Chops and Chats. There was a guy, because I used to do bookings back in Ireland where they'd have to book through an app or whatnot, and there was a guy that came at the end of the day. I was packing up my stuff, and this guy, I seen in his eyes, you know, I seen in his eyes that he wanted to come in and get a haircut and whatnot, but I seen that there was something going on, do you know what I mean? There was something bothering him, you know? And I told him, I was like, all the other guys that I worked with left, and I said, no, I'll stay back, and I'll cut his hair. And I just straight away, we both were talking, you know, everything was good. And then it just started getting like, we started relating to things, you know. So we had that relationship formed straight away. And he gave him a great service. And we ended up just sitting down on the couch after the haircut, because we were just talking for like an hour and a bit. And it was so effortless. It was just happening, you know. It wasn't forced or anything. And he went on his day, and then about a year later, I thought, you know, it just helped a guy out and whatnot. A year later, he came down to Galway, where I'm from, in Ireland, because he lived in Dublin. He travelled all the way to the other side of Ireland to come down and try and find me again. And I wasn't working in that same shop. I was working down the street, and he came to me and he was saying, he went to the shop that I used to work at, and he was trying to find my number and whatnot. And they didn't have my number at the time. I had a new number and stuff, so he couldn't find me, so he went back home. He came down the following weekend and to try and find me again, and it was so weird, because when I was walking up the street, he was walking down the street, and we just seen each other, you know. And he came, and I was happy to see him, he was happy to see me, and he asked me to go for coffee with him, and at the time I was free, so I was able to go. And he just pretty much wanted to thank me for that conversation that I had with him, you know, because at that time he was going through a divorce, his business was going through bankruptcy, the business was failing, and his life was kind of all upside down, you know. And I just listened to what he had to say, and I was just reassuring him that it'll all be okay, and that he needed to focus on himself and whatnot. And he came down a year later to try and find me, and he ended up finding me on the street, and went for that coffee, and he more or less wanted to thank me for that conversation, because that conversation that I had with him was his turning point in his life. You know, even though he was going through a lot of things, that just a conversation like that completely turned the tables. It changed everything for him, and he wanted to say that his life is great now, everything turned around, like the business is doing great now, he met a new woman, and life couldn't be better. But he said it was that conversation that I had with him that changed everything for him, you know. And he was going in for that haircut thinking it was his last. That's the way he was explaining it to me. And he's like, he said, if I didn't have that conversation with you, I don't know where I'd be now, you know. And that was kind of what made me want to show awareness and tell men that, you know, don't hide away from what you might be going through, but just, you know, show it. Go to someone and talk about it rather than holding it and then, you know, not doing anything about it, you know. So that's what kind of motivated me to kind of move forward and wanted to do something with Chop and Chats, you know, because there's always a story. Everyone's kind of going through something, and I think it's important for people to talk, you know, express their emotions. Yeah.
It's an amazing story, but that's where it kind of started and originated, and now bringing it to Perth here in Australia is an amazing initiative to bring on board at Stanford Fathers. So I wish you all the best with it. And
thank you so much.
Commend you for your work in the health sector and bringing Chops and Chats to the table. So thank you very much.
Yeah, it's just the start, but I'm looking forward to it, you know. Yeah. Thanks anyway.
That was Joseph Falcon from Chops and Chats. And now here is AMA WA spokesman Dr. Andrew Miller with his weekly medical and news commentary.
Hi, thanks for your time. Just wanted to make a few reflections this week as we close in on the 1,000 deaths from COVID in Western Australia since the start of the pandemic. And firstly, how lucky we are compared to many places around the world where they had a much worse death toll than we have over the last few years. And that's because primarily we kept the borders closed up until that point when we had a very high vaccination penetration rate into our population. Anti-vax is not really a thing. We had well over 99% of people turn out for their first couple of shots, and over time we will see the value of continuing to get the boosters as they become available. The other thing I'd reflect on is that that's 1,000 families and communities affected, and that these are real people with real faces and names, and who yet had, in most cases, more time to live. And even if they were people who are quite sick, those people, in my experience as a doctor, value every day that they get to spend with family, and these people didn't get that extra time. So even if they were very sick or they were very elderly, which wasn't always the case, it's still a loss for somebody, and I think we can pay our respects and think about those families who've been through a lot. I think also we have to look at where the pendulum is going in terms of protection from an ongoing pandemic, and realise that we've now dropped even mask wearing in hospitals, and I would say that that's swinging too far in the direction of overconfidence at this stage, and we all know where overconfidence and hubris leads to. Unfortunately, transmission of COVID within hospitals to very unwell people has bad outcomes, and we know that it travels in the air. So I think we will come to regret dropping that protection at this stage and getting a bit overconfident. The other thing we have to reflect on is the fact that it's not without its consequence, this disease, apart from death. So there are people who are now still suffering as a result of infection, and up to 5 to 10% of people who have had an infection will have symptoms lasting for months, and some people have not been able to return to normal function for a long time, and COVID is contributing to the severity of other diseases such as dementia and diabetes and cardiovascular disease. So we still have a lot of work to do. It's just as big as smoking in terms of the controls we need to think of for the future, and that doesn't mean that we will go back to lockdowns or to marked restrictions on moving around and that sort of thing. But what it does primarily mean is we need to think about vaccine plus breathing clean air, plus antivirals being available to everybody, which they're not yet. And of course, we've got to think about those people who are not yet eligible for vaccination in this country, becoming increasingly isolated in subjecting all babies right through to 5-year-olds to COVID infection without the protection of vaccination that would be available in United States, Singapore, Canada, Israel, and many other countries around the world, even Cuba. So we're getting increasingly out of step in that regard, and I hope that we'll move to protect our little kids soon, so that they can enjoy the same protection that the adults in the population have. The vaccine, of course, is not a guarantee, but it is very, very good at reducing hospitalisations and severe outcome from the disease. So finally, I would say my thoughts are with those people who lost someone to this disease, or those people who've lost some part of their life to this disease, and an optimistic look towards the future, because we do understand the tools that we need to minimise its impact. Thanks for your time.
That was Dr. Andrew Miller, and that's Western Perspective for this week. We'll be back next Sunday. Until then, Ivan and Melly, back to you.
Thanks, Steve. And now here's Leo with what's coming up on 6 News tonight.
Thanks, guys. On 6 News, condemnation grows over Nazi salutes being performed on the steps of Victoria's State Parliament. Former US President Donald Trump says he expects to be arrested on Tuesday. New South Wales Labor says they're not going to be changing their gambling reform package, as the Greens speak to 6 News, effectively ruling out a deal with the Liberals in the event of a minority government. Watch live right now on our YouTube channel and our website, 6newsau.com. For now, though, it is back to you.
Thanks, Leo. And that's our weekly news and current affairs. We have the latest news on our website, wamnnews.com.au.
Don't forget to subscribe to the WAMN Extra News Club so we can continue our work in the community. Full details on wamnnews.com.au/news/extra. From Melly and myself, wish you good health, good night. See you next Sunday.
Thanks for watching.